On a dusty construction site in downtown Atlanta, the morning sun beat down hard enough to make sweat drip before noon. Amid the noise of jackhammers and forklifts, a group of managers had gathered under a makeshift canopy, trying to look important with their tablets and hard hats. At the center of the group stood Andre Carter, 42 years old, tall, quiet, and seasoned. For over 2 decades, Andre had laid bricks, supervised foundations, and fixed more engineering mistakes than he could count. But what happened next wasn't just another day on the job. "Can you please keep quiet and let the professionals speak?" The voice cut through the noise like a slap. That voice belonged to Greg Winters, a newly appointed project engineer fresh out of San Francisco's tech world. Always in a crisp suit and shiny boots, Greg strutted around like he'd built the pyramids himself. He was known for 2 things: his smug sarcasm and his deep belief that credentials mattered more than competence. Andre had dared to raise a concern about a structural anomaly, something subtle he noticed about the soil grade beneath the northeast corner of the site. The angle was too steep, and without adjustment, the pressure could eventually warp the foundation. But before he could finish his thought, Greg shut him down with a smirk and a jab. "We don't pay laborers to critique architecture. You lay bricks, I design buildings. Stick to what you know." There was a pause in the group. A few chuckled awkwardly, unsure if they were supposed to laugh or cringe. Most looked away. Andre just stared back calmly, hiding the heat of humiliation that rose in his chest. You see, this wasn't just about one man being rude. This was about a silent hierarchy, carved deeper than any blueprint, a structure of who gets heard and who doesn't. But Andre didn't flinch. "I only brought it up because if the pressure shifts even an inch northeast, the base might not last through the second phase." Greg laughed again, louder this time, signaling to the younger engineers watching. "I guess Ensor is ready for his PhD in civil engineering. Maybe Stanford will give you a seat next semester." No one saw it at the time, but that moment was the beginning of a slow demolition. Not of a building, but of arrogance, bias, and brittle pride. And Andrew simply nodded. "As you wish, sir." Then he turned back to his papers, quietly jotting something on a yellow notepad. The meeting moved on. Greg pointed at timelines and progress charts like a quarterback calling plays. No one questioned him. No one dared to. But while Greg bragged about cost-saving materials and speedier timelines, Andre sent one message. Just one. Exactly an hour later, a black Lincoln Navigator rolled onto the lot. Pupo froze not because of the car, but because of what it meant. When a vehicle like that appeared on site, it was never for routine inspection, and certainly not with that license plate, HZN1. Horizon Development's CEO was on site. Greg Winters adjusted his tie, wiped his palms, and turned into Mr. Charm. "Get everything in order," he barked, panic bubbling beneath his polished exterior. "Make sure all the tablets are synced and the renderings are pulled up. This is it, guys!" The workers scrambled. But Andre? He slipped away toward a storage container. When he emerged minutes later, he looked different. Gone was the dusty flannel. Now he wore a crisp shirt, neatly tucked, with pressed slacks and polished boots. His calloused hands now held a slim leather briefcase, a pair of glasses framed his face, and the subtle shift in posture made it clear this was not the same man Greg had mocked. Mags didn't notice, not yet. From the back seat of the Navigator stepped a man in his late 40s. He was tall, black, and wore a navy suit that fit like it had been cut just for him. His expression was composed, unreadable. Greg strode toward him, extending a hand. "Mr. Wallace, I presume? We're honored to have you here. Things are running smoothly." But the man didn't shake his hand. Instead, he glanced at Andre, who now stood just a few steps behind him. Greg looked between them, confused. I'm sorry, where's Mr. Wallace?" The man didn't respond. It was Andre who finally spoke. "My full name is Andre Wallace Carter, founder and CEO of Horizon Developments." The silence was instant and total. Greg's mouth hung open. "Wait, you're the CEO?" Andre nodded, his voice calm. "And apparently just a bricklayer in your eyes." What followed was unlike anything that construction site had seen, Greg stammered, backpedaling with excuses, jargon, and apologies. I didn't know. If I'd known." You should have said something. Andre's gaze was steady. That's the point, Mr. Winters. You shouldn't need to know someone's title to treat them with respect. The rest of the crew had stopped pretending to work. Phones came out, eyebrows lifted. You could practically feel the tectonic plates shifting beneath Greg's shoes. And that's when Walter Grant, the site's oldest supervisor, stepped forward. I've known Andre since we poured our first slab, 25 years ago, before Horizon was a company. Back when it was just a dream and a clipboard. He looked at Greg. Andre doesn't run this place from an ivory tower. He walks the dirt like the rest of us, because that's how you know where a structure really stands. Andre let the silence speak before he added, I've been Sansei the last 2 weeks under a pseudonym. Every few years I do this. No titles, no introductions, just ears to the ground. Greg turned a sickly shade of gray, and then came the final blow. I reviewed the foundation data last night, Andre said. We've already found stress fractures where I warned you. Walter's engineers confirmed them this morning. He turned to Greg. There will be a full review meeting in the main trailer. You'll be present, but not as project lead. As the executives poured out of the Navigator to follow Andre into the trailer, Greg stood there alone. Just another man in a hard hat, stripped of rank, status, and certainty. The air inside the main trailer was heavy with tension, the kind that doesn't need words to fill a room. On one side of the long conference table sat Greg Winters and a few of his team members, some stone-faced, others visibly sweating. On the other side sat Andre Wallace Carter, now fully in CEO mode, flanked by Walter Grant and 2 external structural auditors. Everyone knew this meeting would determine not just the fate of the project, but the professional future of several people in the room. Andre didn't waste time. He tapped a button on his tablet and projected a slide onto the wall. Let's begin. Why were my verbal warnings about the Northeast Foundation disregarded? More importantly, why were they met with mockery instead of professional review? Greg cleared his throat, trying to summon confidence he no longer had. There was a misunderstanding. I thought the concern came from a crew member without formal training. I was attempting to maintain project structure and hierarchy. Horizon's policy manual, Andre interjected without looking up, clearly states that any employee, regardless of rank, has an obligation to report structural concerns. And every manager, regardless of ego, has a responsibility to investigate them. That's not just protocol, it's basic safety. A second tap on his tablet, and the trailer's speakers began to play back an audio clip. Greg's voice echoed across the trailer. We work with numbers here, not with gut feelings from some guy who thinks a tape measure makes him an expert. The shame spread like a slow wave. Greg's tie looked tighter now, his collar suddenly suffocating. One of the engineers seated next to him dropped his pen, and that was the most unnerving part. He was composed, surgical in his control. Let me be very clear. In the last 3 hours, our team has reviewed every major decision made under your supervision, and I'd like the auditors to walk us through what they found. One of the auditors stood. We identified 17 code violations, including improper soil density analysis, skipped rebar inspections, and unauthorized substitution of cheaper materials. Most alarmingly, the Northeast Foundation segment shows early signs of shear stress, exactly as Mr. Carter described. Greg swallowed hard. There must be a mistake. I had signed off on those changes for efficiency, for budget control. Which brings me to my next question, Andre said, flipping to the next slide. It displayed a spreadsheet showing cost variances and internal email exchanges. Why did you push for cost-cutting measures that directly contradicted safety guidelines? Before Greg could speak, one of his own junior engineers blurted out, because of the incentive program. If the project saved over $900,000, 0 cents, we'd all get bonus checks. Greg said cutting corners was worth it. Greg turned to him, stunned. Ryan, what are you doing? The young man's face was pale. Telling the truth. I'm not losing my license for you. Andre leaned back. So let me get this straight. You risked the integrity of a 30-story building and the lives of every person who would work and live inside it for a bonus? There was no response, just the dull thud of reality landing hard. Andrew nodded at Walter, who handed Greg a sealed envelope. "Your termination letter, effective immediately. You're being let go for gross negligence and falsification of safety reports." Greg opened the envelope, eyes darting across the letter. "This is insane. I have a master's degree. I'm a licensed professional. You can't just throw away a career like mine over one bad call." Andre's expression didn't change. "You're right. That's why you have two options. Option 1, termination for cause, and we pursue legal action against you. Your license will likely be revoked." Greg's hand began to tremble slightly. "Option 2, voluntary resignation. You'll return your project bonus and spend the next 6 months as a volunteer instructor in our youth construction training program. You'll help train underprivileged teens in basic engineering and construction ethics. After that, we part ways cleanly." Greg looked stunned. "You want me to teach high school dropouts?" Andre's jaw tightened. "I want you to teach people who haven't had your privileges, who still respect knowledge, even if they weren't born into it. You have 5 minutes to choose." While Greg sat in silence, the rest of the team began packing up their papers. Walter leaned over to Andre. "Should we inform the site crew?" "Yes," Andre said. "They deserve to hear this too. Every one of them." Outside, the workers had already gathered, rumors spreading faster than concrete dust in the wind. When Andre stepped onto the small platform near the equipment trailer, the chatter died down. He didn't need to raise his voice. "For those who don't know," he began, "my name is Andre Wallace Carter. Some of you know me simply as Andre. For the past 2 weeks, I've worked among you as a bricklayer." The murmurs began, shocked faces, wide eyes. One worker nudged another. A few chuckled in disbelief. "I started Horizon Developments with one goal," Andre continued, "build structures where respect isn't based on what degree you have, but on whether you can stand behind your work." He paused, letting it sink in. "Earlier today, I was publicly disrespected by someone who thought experience mattered less than a resume. That person is no longer part of this company." There was silence at first, then slow, scattered applause, not triumphant, but relieved, a gesture of respect from people who'd seen too many of their own ignored. "But this moment isn't about punishment," Andre said. "It's about growth. Every person here matters. Your input, your instincts. If something doesn't feel right, speak up. I don't care if you're pushing a broom or writing code. We build safely or we don't build at all." Just then, the trailer door opened. Greg stepped out carrying a cardboard box. No security escorted him. No crowd jeered. He walked through the center of the group, head down, but the stares that followed weren't mocking. They were heavy with pity. The fall had been public. The landing was quiet. Andrew watched him go, then turned back to the crew. "Let this be the foundation we build on, one where dignity and competence walk side by side." As he stepped down, Walter joined him. "What option did he choose?" he asked quietly. Andre smiled faintly. "Voluntary resignation. And he'll teach for 6 months." Walter raised an eyebrow. "You think he'll last?" "I think he'll learn," Andre said. "And maybe for the first time in his life, he'll realize that being a teacher means knowing you still have a lot left to learn." 6 months later, the New Horizon Tower stood tall and unshakable against the Atlanta skyline, a structure as elegant as it was strong. But to those who worked on it, its beauty wasn't just in the glass and steel. It was in the truth it represented. The foundation, once questioned, had been reinforced, not just with cement, but with humility, transparency, and new leadership principles. It was the first building Horizon completed under its revised ethics and communication protocol, born out of one man's public humiliation and quiet strength. Inside the 30-story tower, on the top floor, where sunlight spilled through massive windows, Andre Wallace Carter reviewed quarterly reports with his executive team. Walter Grant, now Director of Operations, presented the latest data with a quiet pride that matched the tone of the room. "We've had a 78% drop in preventable safety issues since the new whistleblower protocol was launched," Walter reported, flipping to a clean graph on the large digital display. "Every employee, from site cleaner to senior architect, now has a direct line to raise safety concerns, and more importantly, those concerns are being acted on. Andre nodded, scrolling through the report. That's what this building was really about. Not height, not materials. Trust. Walter smiled, then clicked over to the next slide. And our mentorship program has surpassed expectations. Over 50 young men and women from disadvantaged communities are in active training. 94% have either been placed into jobs or are pursuing certification programs. One photo on the slide caught Andre's eye. A group of students, their faces beaming with pride, stood in front of a concrete training wall. Among them was a man most of the city would no longer recognize. No expensive blazer, no polished ego, just a plain t-shirt and suntanned arms. Greg Winters. Walter glanced over. He's still there. Volunteered to stay on for another semester. Says he's got a few students with promise and doesn't want to leave halfway through. Andre raised an eyebrow. He said that? Exact words. And get this, he drives a Corolla now. Paid off in full. Andre chuckled softly and stood. I want to see the training site before I head out for the day. The training center was on the ground floor, outfitted with hands-on learning stations, simulation tech, and massive blueprint tables. It looked more like a hybrid between a construction zone and a modern classroom, and at the center of it all was Greg, crouched beside two students as they reviewed a load-bearing simulation. He looked different, not just physically. There was a lightness to him now, like a man who had finally laid down the weight of needing to be the smartest person in every room. Greg spotted Andre across the space and stood. Mr. Carter. Andre smiled faintly. Greg, how's the teaching life treating you? Greg rubbed the back of his neck. Honestly, it was rough the first few weeks. I kept trying to assert control, over-explain everything, but these kids, they think different, they challenge things, they're creative. Sounds like they're good engineers in the making. They are, Greg said, his voice quieter now, and they're not afraid to ask what I never did when I was starting out. Why? They push back. They bring perspectives I would have dismissed before. Andre studied him for a long moment. Do you remember the day you told me to let the professionals speak? Greg looked down. Every day. You weren't wrong to want order, but you confused respect with rank. They're not the same thing. I know that now, Greg admitted. I thought this would be punishment, 6 months working with teenagers who barely finished high school. But instead, it was like someone handed me a second draft of my own life. He looked around at the students, now huddled over wiring diagrams and CAD screens. I'd like to stay on, maybe longer than just one semester, if that's okay. Andre didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked over to one of the stations, where a girl barely 17 was using a 3D printer to model a modular support beam. Her form was perfect. She glanced up at Greg for a nod, and when he gave it, she grinned and turned back to her work. Andre looked back, approved, but not as penance, as purpose. Greg nodded, his face unreadable, somewhere between relief and something deeper, gratitude maybe. Later that evening, Andre stepped into the lobby of Horizon Tower. The building was quiet now, but the echoes of jackhammers, arguments, laughter, and transformation still lived in the bones of the place. On the far wall, behind a minimalist water feature and a polished granite reception desk, hung a new plaque in bronze. It read, "We build structures with materials, but we build respect with humility." It wasn't just a motto. It was a mission, one earned in sweat, silence, confrontation, and redemption. Greg's fall from grace had been real and public, but what had risen in its place was far more powerful than any tower. The understanding that knowledge without humility is just noise, that credentials without character are scaffolding with no core, and that true leadership sometimes wears dusty boots and speaks only when necessary, but when it does, the whole site listens. Andre didn't need a press conference to tell his story. He had lived it. And the legacy wasn't just Horizon's new policy or the reshaped skyline. It was the hundreds of workers who now knew they mattered. The students who saw a future in hard hats and hard questions. And even the humbled engineer who, despite it all, learned how to build again. This time, not from blueprints, but from truth. If this story moved you, if it made you rethink the lines we draw between labor and leadership, subscribe to the channel, because here we tell stories that dig deeper than titles, stories that prove redemption is possible, and that the strongest foundation is built not from stone or steel, but from the choice to see each other as equals, even when the world tells us not to.